Hi, it's Datache, and let's talk Five Nights at Freddy's.
The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night.
You've probably been exposed to it at one point or another, whether it's through the Let's Plays.
Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through
the recent movie, or the wave of indie horror that spawned from it, both good and, bad. So, with the movie having come out, depending on when I get this out, I wanted to make something to celebrate, so I mashed two of my interests together, Five Nights at Freddy's and Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, at least usually, is about role-playing fun characters while you explore dungeons, fight monsters, and occasionally progress the plot. And about a year ago now, I set off to make my most ambitious D&D session ever, in a bid to get some friends into the game. The goal here was to mix dungeon crawling action with the vibe and strategy of Five Nights at Freddy's power management. How did it go? Well, in this video, you'll get to see the full development process, ranging from the new gameplay mechanics to the lore! But here's the cool part. This one-shot, made for D&D 5e, with custom maps and stat blocks, will be available in the description below for free. That's right, you can get it right now! If you'd like to play it, I'd recommend doing so, since this video will contain spoilers. But if you're interested in how I designed everything, or are thinking of running it yourself as a dungeon master, then you might want to stick around. And don't worry, even if you're not too knowledgeable about D&D, this video will be pretty accessible. So let's get ready to enter a world of fantasy and fun, to see the horrors that dwell below. Let's get ready to get quirky at night. Let's start off with the basics here. This D&D adventure is mostly based on FNAF 1, since I'd argue its gameplay is the most iconic and easiest to adapt into other forms. It's mainly made up of three core mechanics. Number 1. Using cameras. With the camera system, you can look throughout the pizzeria for the locations of all the animatronics, which allows you to know when to, number 2, lock the doors. On either side of you, there are two large sturdy doors the animatronics can't get through. By waiting till they're closing in on your sides, you can protect yourself at the cost of power. Number 3. Managing power. While you're stuck in the office, the only way to protect yourself is through gathering information, like using the lights or cameras, and closing doors, all at the cost of power. If it reaches 0, you lose the only barriers against the animatronics, and are also left at the mercy of good old Freddy Fazbear. These are the ideas the one-shot was based around, and trust me, I know what you might be asking. Datache, FNAF is all about being sat in an office with a feeling of helplessness. How the hell are you supposed to convert that into an active dungeon crawler? I mean, it's a bit of an extreme accent, but it's a fair point. Let's make this a bit easier. We'll take these 3 points and break them down one by one, going through how I incorporated each of them in the process, starting with the idea was simple. The players enter a facility filled with constructs, which is just a fancy way of saying fantasy robots. And the players have access to a security room to view all their positions from. Of course, for them to be hiding, we're gonna need a map. I'll talk you through this. This dungeon map is almost a complete reconstruction of the pizzeria from FNAF 1. The theme has been changed from a family restaurant to a research facility, our sister location. But the general structure is the same, with just a few changes. Our players will enter from the top right, being guided through the archives to the right corridor, and from there to the security room, where after activating power here, we'll be able to enter these rooms. From the security room, they'll be able to peer into any of the named rooms, for a total of 9 viewpoints across the facility. Now, I know that was a lot of information, but I'm going to hold off on talking about individual rooms, since I not only want to leave these as a surprise, but also want to head into the enemy behavior, or more accurately, their movement. The players need an incentive to engage with the camera system, especially because there's a cost for its use, that being power. In the simplest terms, the enemies in the dungeon are rough. Just on entry, the very first encounter against the mangled construct was designed to be the most dangerous. A warning: if the party of level 1s ends up having to fight more than one construct at once, they will lose. Which is why the players have to be cautious of what rooms they enter. A few years back, Tech Rules made a video breaking down the behaviour of the 4 animatronics of the FNAF 1 cast, and while their movement isn't going to be close to that detailed, that information did serve as a basis for everything here. So, let's hop through all the main roaming enemies, and the mechanics behind them. Every time the player characters make a decision that passes time, every surviving construct will get a movement opportunity. These are points in which they can move across the map. For example, the guard construct, or Freddy, will move between almost any named room of the facility at random once per movement opportunity, moving between the archives, kitchen, study, storeroom, and scraps. Bonnie and Chica have the same stat blocks as stalker constructs and act similarly, just moving in different directions. Bonnie moves between the study, archives, and scraps randomly once per movement opportunity, while Chica moves between the archives, entrance hall, and kitchen in a set order. The chaser construct, or Foxy, remains in scraps. If the player characters don't check its camera within 3 movement opportunities, it'll leave the room and rush after the party to attack them. Lastly, the mangled construct is kind of weird because it's one of the only static encounters in the one-shot, meaning an encounter that's designed to happen no matter what. It'll only really be wandering around if the players didn't beat it early on, when it's supposed to appear, but if it's still around, it'll move across rooms through the vents randomly. It's definitely a lot to sort through, but the Dungeon Master is free to make their behavior as simplistic or complicated as they want, even though I'd recommend sticking with the behaviors listed in the doc. That being said, with these crazy constructs scattered around the facility, the idea is that the players can plot a route, pick their battles, or avoid the ones that would wipe them, eventually getting what they need to progress to the final encounter. But it can't just be cameras, right? What else do the players have to balance their power usage with, and how can we build tension? Okay, it's about time we talk about the doors. That's reassuring, isn't it? That's the feeling of security I want to replicate. This is a dungeon crawl, meaning the goal isn't to remain in one room. So how do we keep players returning here as a safe space, while also giving them a motivation to play it defensive sometimes and use the doors? 2 words: HP recovery. In D&D, when your hit points or HP are low, you can take either a short rest or long rest to recover it. Short rests are rolled with dice, but don't give you back all your abilities, unless you're based. While long rests are a full recovery, but take longer to perform. Because long rests are more commonly used, and I'm gonna be honest, the players are going to get fucked up. For this one shot in particular, its use is going to be more limited. The cost of fully healing is less about the time constraint here and more about power usage. Because there are constructs on the loose throughout the map, the security room will remain the player's safe haven. For the cost of some power, the doors can be locked, and the players can heal. Of course, this adds quite a bit to the pressure not to run out of power, as I think we all know what would happen if things got to that point. This helped really lean into the survival horror vibes, with the pressure to manage your limited resources and especially hit points. which made linking long resting with the door mechanic feel like the right choice. This can also lead to some really fun risk versus reward situations, where you may have to forgo healing even if you really need it in order to save on dwindling energy, or may have to make a tough call to lock off the room if you're being pursued, both of which happened in playtesting. Now that we've established the stakes, it's about time we see the main bulk of what players will be doing while managing The power system is practically the lifeblood of FNAF 1, and it's about the same here in Quirky at Night as well. Once the players activate the generator room, they're given access to the previously mentioned cameras and doors of the security room. But I think it's about time we get a look at the power system. In FNAF 1, the power level drops over time, its rate dependent on how many systems are being used at once. And while in this one-shot there isn't a way to make things that are time sensitive, the costly nature of closing doors and the lower starting power can keep the pressure high from the get-go. You see, there's a max power of 100, but the players start with 70. It's 5 power to view one room through the camera, and 20 to close the doors. And immediately you can tell why managing this is important. Luckily, scattered throughout the facility are small blue crystals, which, when taken back to the generator room, can be used to top it up. They aren't worth a lot of power, but usually enough to get some more camera viewings. Of course, these aren't the only items you can find across the facility, with each room having some form of item, weapon, or lore if you look hard enough. I like this system because it incentivizes the players to explore, so even if they don't find the item required to progress to the final boss, they can usually recoup their losses or even find something cooler. This also makes players want to go back out of the security room. Even if things go wrong, they don't just hide away and wait to die, keeping the tension and excitement going through the entire adventure. And that is the core of the gameplay of Quirky at Night. Although, I'm sure any FNAF veterans know that anything based on that franchise can't be that simple. Of course, there is. Thankfully, we don't need MatPat or a lot of fanfic to explain this story. The majority of the information is explained either in the opening of this one-shot, or is scattered throughout the facility for the player characters to come to their own conclusions on. That being said, if you still wish to play this one-shot, going in as blind as you reasonably can after all that game design jargon, this is where I would tell you to dip. This ain't Shakespeare, but if you want to have something to look forward to going into this, I'd recommend going into the description, downloading the one-shot for free, and finding a dungeon master you believe can run it. As for the rest of you, whether you wish to run this for your table or are just curious, let's learn the true story behind Quirky at Night. Amongst many ways to express oneself through magic, soul shaping and its ties to necromancy have left it forgotten, strewn across the sands of time. It's a simple ability to take the soul, the life energy from the dead, and reshape it to serve your will, whether into large blue crystals or a magically conductive liquid. One thing remains true with the creations born from soul. They are immense sources of energy, the applications to machinery nearly endless, which is why when the nobles of the capital contacted one Bill Averton about military applications of this forgotten power, he was hesitant. After all, if this were to be abused, the souls of the dead could be bound in conflict for more than a lifetime, maybe forever. Of course, to a man like him, the pursuit of Magi technology trumped all else. Whatever he would have to do, he would do so. The murder of one child would soon become 2, then 3, then 5, then so many others. But he couldn't stop, could he? Not now. He had to prove himself, and the power of soul shaping. He would work himself to the bone over months, but eventually he would let his guard down the rage of the souls he had tormented would boil over, and he would finally get a taste of his own medicine, as they finally took their revenge. And this is where the players come in. With his lack of contact with the outside world, this mercenary group gets hired to retrieve Averton and his research. The problem being, not only is the facility filled with violent constructs, but once they learn the truth of what's going on in here, will they still side with the nobles who hired them? I think that's really compelling. Now that the players know the horrors involved in these experiments, can they go through with returning that information? By doing so, they could condemn hundreds of other people to the fates of these poor kids, but if they get caught lying or hiding this, they could be hunted down by some of the most powerful people in the country. Hell, if you wanted this to be the setup to a full campaign, I couldn't stop you, could I? But yeah, that's Quirky at Night. A survival horror D&D 5e one-shot about resource management and rough encounters, with just a little bit of lore sprinkled in. Of course, I haven't spoiled everything. There's still tons of smaller goodies to check out, which I'll remind you, you can do for free by going to the description and downloading the adventure. So what are you waiting for? It's time to get quirky at night. And for now, I'll see you guys in the next one.